Hey guys, welcome back to Critical African Thinkers. As usual, this is a place where we examine everything under the microscope of logic to ascertain that which is most factual and logically consistent. And today we're having back Michelle Kerr, and she has been this should be the third time we're doing this on my channel, Michelle. So
Yeah,
she has been very consistent. Yeah, she's been a very good resource for this channel in terms of the things that we talk about, and specifically as it relates with education because she's a school teacher. So today this is more like a trilogy of our conversations on education. I
part three,
think that
right?
education is yeah, education is very important. It gives people the necessary skills, um, prerequisite knowledge, just to function in the world, whatever level of education, either at the primary, at the secondary, or the tertiary level. It is very important that people are educated. And in my part of the world, education is sort of a gateway out of, out of some low economic status. It sort of helps you. If you can get a good education, then possibly you can succeed more in life. So I am trying to understand more of the American educational system, and we've talked previously on how much powers teachers have in determining what is taught in the classes. But today we're going to take it to another direction. We're going to try to um, look at college itself. Why is it should it be for everyone? Should college be for everyone, or what is the necessity? What is the utility of college in this age? Especially looking at the fact that college is sort of expensive, or education in general now is sort of expensive. So is it a wise decision to want to get a college degree after getting a lower forms of education? So I believe that in this conversation, we'll be able to cover all that. And Michelle, with a wealth of knowledge, will be able to tell us whether or not everyone should go to college or college should be for everyone. So, but before we start, let me just can you explain how college works in the US? How people get into college, and just a brief overview. Because in my country, what we have the kindergarten, we have the primary school, we have the secondary school, then we have the universities. So, and what we call college usually in my country is the secondary school level. So, but I'm thinking that college in your instance refers to the university. So maybe you can just explain that before we get deeper into the conversation. So, how does college work? What kind of
Yeah,
degree do you get in college in the US?
yeah, I believe you're correct. The United States is relatively unusual in that we do not sort out of what you call primary school, which we would probably call K-8. Europe, in a lot of Europe, and I think even in Canada, at that level, you have to demonstrate ability. And so they sort. There's a lot of sorting. And a lot of people don't have the option to go to high school that is designed to get you ready for college. And that's true in a lot of countries. Um, and the United States is unusual in that regard. We've always sent everybody to high school. And in general, this created a problem because originally, like if you go back 100 or so years, probably, I don't know, somewhere around 10 to 20%, maybe less, graduated from high school. But in the early 1900s, America had this push to get everybody to graduate from high school. It wasn't official. It wasn't anything designed by the government or even by the states. It's just something that happened. It's called the high school movement. If you read Claudia Golden on it, she talks about that. Um, and so as a result, we really sent everybody to college. And at the other end, a lot of people dropped out because, there was jobs. You could, as a high school dropout, you could get really good jobs because um, there was no need for a high school education for a lot of jobs. So there were many people who were high school dropouts who could have good. Sorry, by the way, my voice is kind of hard, a little fuzzy today. You could get a good job out of high school. Dropping out of high school, you could get a good job if you finished high school. So going to college up through most of the 20th century, starting through, say, 1960, going to college was a fairly unusual thing. And it wasn't necessarily about brains, a lot of it was about class. Oh, I can tell you exactly, not 1960, 1957. In 1957, Sputnik, the Russian satellite, entered orbit. And this shocked America and said, we've got to find our smartest people. So before then, college was more of a class thing. If you were an upper income person, then you went to college. Finishing college was fairly unusual in those days. You had to know calculus in order to get through college. You had to pass some fairly severe college courses. And so it was a class-based thing, and it was also for a very few people who were truly, dedicated to their intellect. And in 1957, a lot of that changed, and that was when we first started funding efforts to say, look, let's really kind of identify our smart people, no matter where they are, and get them to college. There's a famous movie called October Sky, which is fundamentally about four kids from West Virginia who in earlier era would have had nothing, no ability to go to college. But by 1957, when Sputnik happened, they were able to use the interest that there was in people who demonstrated scientific ability. And all four of them ended up, actually, five of them in the real story ended up going to college. So that kind of changed things. And at the same, so at that point is when things like the SAT started to really sort. So the SAT, which is a famous college admission test, also the ACT, before 19, again using 1960 as a rough ballpark, there wasn't a lot of competition for it. But after, and it wasn't really used to sort people. After 1960, it was. Also, another thing that happened, and all of these seemed very organic and very good at the time. After World War II, we started the GI Bill, and a lot of people a lot of men who had finished in the armed services, and they came back and they went to college. So they were a little older. Oftentimes, they were married with kids. They had had a lot of training. They were highly educated by the average high school standards of the day. And so colleges were starting to say, wow, we really want a higher class of student coming into college. So there was likewise a push, and this is the original quote, new math of the 1960s, which, by the way, I was educated under the new math that everybody jokes about, which was a highly abstract kind of new math. You did set theory, you did different, counted by different bases, things like that. I remember I used to have to work problems in base 3 and stuff like that. And so all of these changes kind of coalesced, along with, in the 1960s, we have the civil rights era. And so in a way, all of these things, if you look at college admissions, you'll see a spike during that time. And what this did in a lot of other things is, like, if you look at things like the Vietnam War in America, in 1942, when America entered World War II, if you were a kid who was, drafted, you're like, well, I'm either going to work in the family store, I'm going to, go work in the mines, or maybe I'll find a job, farming somewhere. But the idea that you had to put it off for 3 years to fight a war wasn't a big deal. By 1968, when they started drafting people, there were kids going, hey, no, I have college plans. You're disrupting my life. So all of this kind of came together and made college kind of this thing to do. A lot of people who might not have planned to go to college said, hey, if I go to college, I won't get drafted, which was true until the end years of the Vietnam War. So there was a push to beat the Russians. There was the civil rights movement, which said that we need to stop discriminating against African Americans. There was the push to get away from the draft. And all of these things combined to make college something that became more of a rite of passage. Meanwhile, of course, on the other end, although this doesn't happen right at the same time frame, but the value of high school diploma in the job market, computers became more of a big thing. Logic became more of a big thing. You couldn't just get a job as a high school dropout. Started more and more, you couldn't just get a job with a high school diploma, because more and more jobs saw the added value that came with education. So they started making more demands. So all of this led to a push. The meantime, at almost the same time, because the 70s are widely regarded as one of the lowest points in American education. where we really did have some a drop in educational attainment, and particularly let me take it back. Particularly because it became a time when we didn't kind of use standards at all. It's famously hippy dippy. Again, um, I was in high school during the 70s, and it was much more. You could take courses that you wanted to. There was a lot of more open education, and so things like that were happening during this time. Um, and then in 1983, sorry for giving you this long history, but in 1983, this famous report called The Nation at Risk came along and said, you know what, we're at risk. Now they're worried about Japan. Because, of course, by 1983, Russia's out of the picture. They're kind of a non-entity. 6 years later, the wall falls. But now we're worried about Japan. And we're not competing in the nation's marketplace. And so we have to have higher standards in high school. It's terrible, but high school diplomas don't mean anything. We have to start making them meaning something. So people started encouraging people to take more high school math, so getting to calculus became a big thing. I don't know if you've ever seen the movie Stand and Deliver, which is about a teacher in East LA who taught a bunch of low-income Hispanic kids to pass the AP course. This led Jay Matthews, the guy who wrote the book about it, started pushing the AP. And so all of these things started saying, college was the thing. That was what we wanted everybody to get to. And meanwhile, because it turns out that there was so much pressure to get kids to be educated, what happened after the 80s is this led to a concomitant increase in scores among white and Asian kids. But because during the 80s, it was a choice, a lot of African American, Hispanic kids, and also poor kids of all races, they didn't choose to do this. So the 90s became a time where we said, we're not going to track anymore. We're not going to pull out the smart kids. We're just going to say that everybody needs to achieve. This is when charter schools came around, saying we're going to take low achieving kids in public and failing public schools, and we're going to put them and we're going to teach them right, and miracles are going to happen. And so all of that was about getting more kids to college. And so, because college doesn't have any, because college used to have something called a given standard. It was generally, say, roughly at the high school achievement level of proficient. Reading at, say, a sophomore level, knowing, you didn't have to know calculus to get into college, but it was kind of expected you would be comfortable with algebra 2. So what was happening is that we were feeding a lot of kids into college who didn't have that level, and that led to something called remediation. So there were kids who would go to college and they go, hey, yeah, you're here, you got a high school diploma, but you don't have all this education you need, so you're going to have to take a bunch of courses and not get any credit for them just to get ready for college. Led to a large dropout rate because a lot of kids are like, this is terrible, I'm never going to get there, and dropped out. They took loans to go to college, which of course that's part of the thing is that kids could easily get loans to go to college, to undergrad. So they took loans to go to college, and then they had college debt. This has been going on for 30 years. So now, since the 90s, a combination of kids going to college, taking out loans, not being ready for college, getting remediated, paying for the remediation, then dropping out. It became more and more common for kids to take 6 or longer years to go to college. In fact, college don't have a 4-year graduation rate. They generally have a 6-year graduation rate. And meanwhile, tuition is going increasingly high. And one other thing, which I imagine most Americans listening in know, but college loans are not dischargeable by bankruptcy. They're not dischargeable by anything except probably death. For all I know, they can still come after the heirs after death. So these loans were really a problem. So as we look at it now, after years and years and years of this, several things have happened. One, we have an enormous amount of student debt. 2, colleges are dropping their standards even more than they already were. Once they realized that remediation was a problem, many schools are doing away with remediation. Now, there was already pressure from elite colleges to do away with the SAT. The pandemic and also the George Floyd situation of a year and a half ago led to increased pressure to do away with that. So at this point, we're at a point where everybody can go to college if they want to. And whenever I hear people talk about how we got to get kids college ready, I'm like, why? Trust me, if you do nothing through college and get to college level, and you're in, you have two levels of, you have a 2.0 GPA, you're still going to be able to go to a community college. So, but the ideal when we talk about college ready, we like students to be at calculus, which is unreasonable, but at least, pre-calc. And we like them to have 4 years of English. We like them to take some AP courses. And we have a tremendous pressure on all schools to get underrepresented minorities into these courses so that we can say they're college ready. But again, there I was trying to tell you the history. In my view, what we're at right now is a very dangerous time because we are really devaluing a college degree because anybody can get in and there's no standard to the courses that you're taking. And pretty soon, say in a couple years, you're going to start seeing colleges under tremendous pressure if their graduation rate isn't the same by each race. And that's going to lead to increased pressure on professors to pass courses. And if you remember the last time we talked, I talked about teachers who are under pressure to pass pass kids in high school courses. I think that's going to transfer to college. So that's where we are right now. Right now, everybody can go to college. It's generally considered a good thing. There is, and always has been, again, going back 30, 40 years, there's always been another voice saying, hey, look, not everybody has to go to college, but nobody wants to do the work to make a world in which that would be true. And as a result, people just talk a lot, but they don't really think through the actions. In the meantime, everybody's going to college. One last thing, and then I'll shut up. Sorry for the lecture. The last thing to say is that if you look at it originally, I really think there's a lot of people, for example, like right now, there's a talk about men are going to college less. Well, there's a lot of ways for men to get into good paying jobs that don't require college. The military, chief among them, the trades, another one, the police, places like that. There's a lot of jobs like that. Whereas in women's fields, traditionally women's fields, most of them are more recent and thus they kind of go through the college path. So I'm not as concerned about the gender gap in college. I am much more concerned about the standards gap, which is just enormous. And we've already completely devalued the meaning of a high school diploma. We're now in the process of devaluing a college one. A lot there for you to think about. Jump in and tell me what I didn't make clear or anything else you want to talk about. Hello? Anybody there? I see the comments are there. Commenters, can you hear me?
All right, that was
Hey
a
there,
great
Charles.
summary, Michelle. Thank you. So, one thing that struck me as you were talking about this was, hello,
Yeah, I'm here.
can you hear me now?
Yes. I
Okay,
couldn't
okay.
hear you for a
So,
while, but yeah, I can hear you now.
all right, all right. So, great summary. Now, one thing that struck me when you were talking about this was that you said that college originated initially. It was a class thing that people who went to college was for the class and all that. So, is that still the case today, or has it evolved into something else? I have a sense that it has evolved beyond the class thing. That college is now very fashionable with people of all socioeconomic class. Am I true in that? Am I
Yeah,
correct in
no,
that
the last
sense?
time the last time college was a class thing, and I should say, here's what I mean. If you went to Harvard in like 1932, it much more likely meant that your father was a lawyer than it meant that you were super smart. You might be smart, you might not be, but it was much more about that. If you went to Harvard in even 1980, it meant that you were a smart person and that you have been met some fairly competitive standards. That's kind of what I mean by class. And yes, absolutely. It's
Okay,
today.
okay. So he
Today,
had he had he had nothing to do with socioeconomic status.
well, I mean, it does. Certainly today, it's still true that poor kids are more likely not to go to college, but more poor kids go to college than in the past by a long shot. And that's where you hear in America, there's a lot of talk about making college completely free.
Okay. Now, prior to now, you were talking about most people getting their high school diploma. Now, people getting their high school diploma in this current age today, 2021, would they have the necessary skills with a high school diploma? Would they have the requisite skills to be able to function in society, to get good paying jobs, and to build a career if they don't go to college?
Um, Hang on 2 seconds, okay, Kenya? I'm going to close some doors. I'm sorry, I'm going to run away for 2 seconds. If you can mute me.
All right.
Sorry about that. There's just too many conversations going on that were distracting me, even if you couldn't hear them. No, well, as we've talked before in previous conversations, a high school diploma does not really connote anything other than you've gone to high school for 4 years, and somebody probably did some work to get you the credits that you needed to get to college. I mean, high school. So no, a high school diploma does not anymore denote a certain level of skills. However, let me say something about that. It never was. I mean, high school has never been something that says we guarantee this level of work. The difference is that in the past, relatively few people finished college, and even and so like if you made it through college and it's through the say the 1960s, it probably meant that it was somewhat of an academic achievement, at least in the sense of that you'd finished it, and then as time went on, though, we now there's tremendous pressure to get everybody through college, and of course the minute that the pressure becomes big, you can't have pressure and standards. You can't penalize a school if it doesn't graduate everybody and then expect standards to be great. It's just not possible. And I think many people believe that, think that everybody can learn what they're expected to learn, which is not true. So no, it's not. But high school has never been that. And one thing that I firmly believe is more necessary is I think employers need to stop looking to schools to say, "Hey, fix our employee problems." I'm like, go train them yourself. But in answer to your question, no, it does not say if you have a high school diploma, it doesn't mean anything other than that you have a high school diploma. That's what I mean about being rendered meaningless. It no longer has any educational value to it.
So if that is the case, and currently we do not have the situation where employers are the ones training their employees, they're still you know leaving it at the hands of the educational system. Don't you think that that is a very good argument for why more people should go to college? Because if the high school diploma is sort of meaningless at this point, where would you get good quality candidates to be able to run a society and run the economy, if not college?
Well, because colleges, that's not their job. That was never college's job to do that. College's job is to give you higher education. So if you think of it in terms of uh, that, so suppose you get an incoming freshman class. You know how I talked before about how in high school, if I'm teaching a math class, I might have a 3 or 4 year gap in ability. Well, now imagine you're an incoming community college and you have some students who are reading at fourth grade level, some students that are reading at ninth grade level, some that are reading at high school level. How do you how do you how how is it you're going to make them available? How can a college degree have meaning if in one case it means, hey, look, we got the fourth grade kid to eighth grade reading level, and oh, we got the eighth grade kids now reading at 10th grade level, and the high school graduate now knows one who was reading at high school level is now a computer programmer. How do you have one degree show all that? So when you say college should train it, it's not like there's this endless line of training. It's not like it's not like we have standards to here and here and here and here and here. You're just basically envisioning a world where like, well, keep teaching them, and eventually they'll learn enough to be useful. Okay, but that's not what college is supposed to be. That isn't really what high school is supposed to be either. And part of the problem is we've never accurately defined what those two things mean. I would argue it's two. This is why I've said before we need a tiered high school system, and I think a tiered high school system would be a lot more useful than a tiered college system. In either way, in America, we have the same problem with the tiers that we have with tracking, that we have with everything else, which is that if it is not racially balanced, there's going to be pressure to change it. And that's what started a lot of it to begin with.
So, are there any merits at all to gaining a college education for society at this point in time? Are there any merits?
Well, the payoff to a college diploma used to be tremendous. That's one of the reasons why we sent everybody to college. There was lots of research showing that the salary advantage of a college diploma was significant over a high school diploma. Hence, we sent everybody to college. That advantage is decreasing tremendously, in large part because of the lowered ability of the kids that are going to college now. But it is still there. College still pays off. There's still quite a lot of research showing that even 2 years of college over a high school diploma pays off. Now we don't know why. Part of the problem is we don't yet know if it's a signaling value or if it is the human capital value. That's a common debate among economics. Is it simply that an employee is more likely to hire somebody with 2 years of college and therefore it's good to go to 2 years just so that you can look good to employers? Or are you actually more valuable for those 2 years of education? And there's a constant argument in economics about that.
Okay, so aside college, after high school, what other avenues are there for people to gain some skills, some marketable skills in America right now?
Well, there's trades. There's vocational school is usually referred to as something in high school, but there's the trades have training programs. There's the military, which is a big one for men. There's some professional 2 year schools that basically give you the equivalent of a AA degree. Like for example, if you want to be a hygienist, a dental hygienist, you can go to community college, but there might be a long waiting list, or you can pay $20,000 or $50,000 to go to 2 years to a professional training school. They're both doing about the same thing. Um, there is there is some advantage to, sometimes people get lucky and they get a job and they can work their way up from there. But the thing to remember about that is that if you are ever, and I've known this happens to several people, that you start in at a career out of high school and you work your way and you do really well and you become a manager or a VP even, and you're, 35, 40 years old, suddenly your company goes under, or you get laid off, or your industry's out, something goes wrong, you're screwed. Without a college degree, a 40-year-old, without, it just doesn't matter what your resume says. So there's, again, for a lot of reasons, it's just probably better for people with any ability at all right now to go to college. And that's the problem. The incentive in hiring is still there, and we don't know enough about whether it is increasing whether it's actually more ability. One other thing that's going to happen, it's already starting to happen, is that you're going to see masters become more valuable, because it's like, look, I'll go to 2 years and I have a master's instead of a bachelor, so that'll make me more valuable. And that's also signs that the college degree is decreasing in value. Right now should be changing that, by the way. Um, you would think right now it at this point in time, with the high, with the low, everybody's desperate for workers. This should be a really good time for everybody to be getting some new skills and to go out there and test the market and say, well, I mean, I've got 2 years of college. Let me see if I can get a good job and maybe finish college part time. That would be a good thing to do right now. But I haven't seen any evidence that that's happening.
Okay. A thing that usually fascinates me about education in America is when I hear about student loans and student debt. Because in
Mhm.
my country, most people that get an education, their parents actually pay out of pockets. They don't take out loans for education, either in the primary, secondary, or up to the university level. Even people that their parents sponsor them for master's degrees, even those that their parents sponsor them for, they go outside the country to the US, to the UK to do their masters. Their parents always pay out of pocket. They don't get to take loans. It's not fashionable here, or I don't know. We don't do that. So how is it structured that people have to take out loans that they get to pay later on in life just to get an education?
Well,
I don't understand how that is. Is it that college is so expensive, or uh, just like make that make sense to me?
I think what happened, there's two or three things that happened, and this is not my area of expertise, but I can tell you the general story. Um, First off, for a long time, like when I went to the Cal State University system. So in California, there's a UC system, which is a top public university, then the Cal State, which is the second most. And UC at the time I graduated cost about $1,000 a semester. Cal State at the time cost, I know this because I paid it, $113 a semester. Now, even in 1980, okay, that was pretty inexpensive. I mean, that was like, even if you transfer today's dollars, that would be pretty cheap. So it was very affordable. And so the idea was you took a college loan, and it was you would be able to pay it back rapidly because your career opportunities in college would be so much better that you could pay it back easily. And that was true for law school. Now, law school and med school were the loans were much more, and those were more expensive, but that was still the rule. And so all the elite colleges, the Harvards, everybody else, they all charge, to this day, they all charge roughly the same amount of money. I think it's 60,000 a year now. I don't remember, but they all kind of agree. It's all about the same thing, the price tag. But most of them give a discount depending on how desirable a candidate you are. So anyway, they so in the original thing, it was not a huge loan, and it would be more than justified for your advantages once you got out of college. Then to and as a result of that, and I believe this happened from the beginning. Part of the deal was like, look, this is such a huge loan. This is such a significant loan that we're doing in your future, that you can't discharge this loan even in bankruptcy. So in America, I don't know what it's like where you live, but in America, when you are uh, if you file for bankruptcy, you basically can eliminate all your debt. Now, bankruptcy is really bad on your record. It's a dangerous thing to do, but you eliminate all your debt. You get to keep your house. I think you get to keep your 401k. I forget. There's certain different things you do versus a type of bankruptcy. But one of the things you can't get rid of is student loans. So that makes student loans incredibly safe for banks. And so that also meant that colleges could start to charge more and more and more money. And so what happened was there was an explosion in college tuition. And ironically, even as they're exploding in tuition, colleges were more and more getting rid of their professors. There's fewer and fewer tenured professor opportunities. There's college courses are often taught by adjuncts, teachers with a PhD or even just an instructor, yeah, and but aren't tenured professors. So they were driving down that. They were upping the amenities, and they were charging more and more money. So by the end of the decade, when I went to San Jose State, it was 113 a semester at the beginning. It was something like I don't know, 300 or 400 in the 90s. Today, I think it's something like 1,000 or two per semester. It could be even more. I haven't checked recently. It's up tremendously, and that's for one of the more least expensive university educations there is. Berkeley, at this point, the UC systems are now, I think, 20,000 a year. Maybe you could look it up, but they're considerably more. So there's been a 20, 30-fold increase in prices during this time. And that's because the banks are happy to loan the money because they know that they'll get it back no matter what. And so as a result, what you have now happening is something quite different and it's been this way for like 10 or 15 years, I'd say, where now the trade-off is you're looking at, oh, you got accepted to Columbia. Great. Congratulations. That's a $200,000 loan. Your parents can't pay any of it. You'll take some of it out. Your parents will take some of it out. It's $200,000, but that's okay because you're from Columbia. Well, these days, a Columbia degree, particularly if it's not in something like, computer science or something like that, isn't going to get you the kind of job that will necessarily help you in paying off an enormous loan that will continue to get larger. And so that has been happening more and more, that a lot of, to this day, I mean, today, I would never advise a kid who wasn't rich, who got into Harvard. I would never advise him or her to take out loans to go to Harvard. I just wouldn't. It's like, it's too much money. You're know that you got accepted, frame the acceptance letter, and then go somewhere else that's less expensive or that will pay you more to go, because it's no longer worth it. And that's been true, for, as I said, 15 or 20 years. So you've got those 15 or 20 years, though, of kids making really bad decisions, and they have, $200,000-$300,000 worth of debt that they have no chance of paying off. And this has led to a real issue with millennials and their attitude, that their demands, they feel like they've been screwed. They came out in the market, but particularly those of them who came out between 2008 and 2012, and there wasn't a lot of jobs. there's a lot of anger about it. But the reality is they shouldn't have taken out the money. So there's a real kind of screw up in incentives that there's right now no real pressure to change. The obvious thing to change would be to make the loans dischargeable in bankruptcy, but that would lead to an enormous moral hazard problem. And the other problem, because most kids, when they come out of college, could say, "Hey, I'm bankrupt. That's it." Um, so there's not a lot of ways to fix it. But that is why college is so expensive, is because they're basically guaranteed the money. The colleges get the money from the banks, and the banks know that they're going to get the money from the people, because no matter what, they will have to pay those loans.
So it seems to me that the existence of the college loans itself gave an incentive for the college tuition to start going up.
Yes, that's. I think there's a lot of research showing that as well. Yes.
So something has to be done about the idea of college loans, because if it's one of the factors that is pushing up the price of tuition, then something has to be done about it so that it becomes much more affordable. Because my original question was, why was there even a need in the first place for people to take out loans to go to college? Because is it that it was so expensive that the parents could not manage to pay from their salaries, or the parents just wanted the kids to, take more responsibility for their education after high school at that point in time? So which is it? it was
Oh
it
no,
was still too
it's a
expensive even before the existence of college loans. It was still too expensive that parents could not manage to pay it out of the salaries in a year.
not just the parents couldn't imagine to pay it. They couldn't. You can not I mean, your 20,000 a year is not something parents could pay. What I mean, look, when I went to college, you could you could work a summer full time and make enough money to pay for college. It was easy. Even if you went to Harvard or something like that, you might have to take some loans out, but you could still work a summer and then maybe take a part-time job through the year and pay for the bulk of it. Okay? That's no longer true at the current costs. Now again in California, living expenses are a huge deal. So if you want to go to San Jose State, which is a very good Cal State university, the tuition might be 5,000 a year, but living here is another 20. Okay, so $25,000 a year. It's very difficult to work, go to school, and get a job that pays 25,000 a year. So certainly, kids should take fewer loans. There's no question about that. But the idea that this is something that parents could pay is just not true. So the reason they take out loans is because it feels affordable, because they know it's guaranteed. The problem is that they don't realize how much it's going to add up to after 4 years, and how much they're going to have to pay. And by the way, they have to go through a million loan disclosures. And let me tell you, I went to Stanford when I was, 47. I went to Stanford when I was 47, and I was totally planning on getting loan forgiveness. And so I took out all the, and I did, by the way, I only had to pay, I think, a total of 12,000 to go to Stanford on I think like $50,000 worth of loans. And I wouldn't have had to pay that much if I'd remembered to pay insurance, my interest. But the point is, you go through all this paperwork. You're like, yeah, 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 click, click, click. You need the money. You're going to take it regardless of what they say. So so yeah, the kids just take the loans, and they're not thinking through financially because they're 18 years old, and their parents are often not thinking it through either. And a lot of times parents don't do the right thing by their kid says, "Well, I really want to go to this expensive school," and the parents will pay for you to go. Parents should probably do less of that. But anyway, yeah, school is expensive, and school and they take out loans because school is very, very expensive in California, and part of, and not just in California, in the country. I don't think community college is not very expensive, and I've never understood this, make community college free, because community college, at least in California, is pretty close to free now. It's stayed very low cost. So I don't understand that. But once you get to 4 years, they're pricey.
Okay, so I was gonna ask something else before my the network cut me off, so maybe I'll just go with the question now. So I was saying that Europe has sort of a good educational system, at least compared to the US as well. And I think I've noticed that some European countries have sort of free tuition. So why aren't more Americans going to Europe to get an education, at least
Well,
college
first off,
education?
because European countries teach English, so they can come here, but we don't teach English. We don't teach. We're not. Most Americans can't speak other languages. So there are some Americans who go to Canada, which has some good deals, and England, which has some good deals. But we don't go to the other countries because they tend not to. Um, um, we'd have to be fluent in those languages usually. One other thing, which is by and large, our schools are better. I mean, America's college university system is envied by everyone. I don't know if it will be after 10 years of accepting everybody. We'll see. But we'll also see if that holds. I'm not entirely sure that it'll hold. But I mean, it doesn't make sense to go to France to go to education. It's not going to be that much more affordable, and your education isn't going to be that much better than
Hello,
in
Michelle.
even Kentucky. Yeah. Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Hello.
Hang on. Can you hear me? I'm here. Can you hear me? I I can't hear you. No, I can't hear you. I don't know how to make comments. Can anybody hear me?
Hello.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah, yeah. Can you hear
Okay.
me now?
Yeah, I think people can hear me, but you're breaking up now. Try again. I couldn't hear you. I mean, you were breaking up.
There's been rain. Can you hear me now?
Yes, now I can hear you.
Okay, okay. So network is terrible here. My next question would be this discussion from the sense that I get from this discussion, you hold the opinion that college is not so necessary. People shouldn't really bother going to college. You can get an high school education and you can get a good job with that, or you can get some other form of
No,
maybe vocational training or trades and all that.
no, that's not my
That's not your
opinion.
sense?
No, no. My opinion is definitely that
Okay.
not everybody should go to college. But my opinion is that logically speaking, for all but really anybody who is marginally who is intelligent enough to even do the minimum of college work, they are probably logically better off going to college unless they have access to the army, the military, or something like that. My argument is different. My argument is that um, we need to fund vocational training. We need to put employers in responsible for more training, and we should limit college. If we limit college, like for example, if just to give an example, suppose Congress passed a law that said you couldn't go to college unless you demonstrated ability of, second year algebra and a Lexile ability of, 10th or 11th grade. Okay, that would wipe out a whole lot of people from being able to go to college. It would be highly politically controversial. The other thing it would do is dramatically limit the amount of college of people who could go to college. It would probably wipe out a lot of colleges, and it would probably reduce the number of seats available at colleges, and that would kind of fix this problem we're in now. What I just said isn't going to happen. Until then, I would say we still need to work on. We need to give opportunities to people who aren't interested in college that are at least as good as college. That's probably funding vocational education for post high school as well as we do college. So, for example, if you want to go to a 2-year training course in welding, you should be able to get a loan for that as easily. And there should be enough welding places so you're not having to wait for 3 years or something like that. So, uh, no, I don't. And the other thing is that, it's kind of like I can't think, one feeds the other. I think if fewer kids went to college, if they opted out of college, then employers would have to figure out what to do. So it wouldn't be right to say that I'm saying nobody should go to college right now, or that fewer people. I would rather it be, because in the current system, you're better off going to college. So what needs to happen is, so there's two different answers to your question. There's what I think should happen legally and politically, and there's what I would tell a kid to do. Okay. I would tell a kid today to get a college education for as inexpensively as they can, find the vector between good and cheap. I would tell them to take out as minimal loans as they can. And I would tell them to get to the degree as quickly as they could. That's what I would tell people to do. From a political and legal institution, I would say we would not. I would not. I would start um, reducing. I would create standards around how you could get a college loan. I think it's going to be harder to do what I'd like to do, which is stop colleges from accepting people who don't have a given level of ability. But it's probably easier to force banks to not give loans to people to go to college that don't have a given demonstrated ability level, which would be, not super high. I wouldn't make it extremely, like, ambitious. I would just make it, as I said, something like second year algebra and, the ability to read and write a coherent sentence at a high school senior level. I mean, a advanced high school senior level. But if you do that, that would be tremendously controversial. But those are the two things I like. In the meantime, and then the third thing is to fund vocational training. I would like to see vocational training centers put all over the country, more than they are now, and also fund vocational training for kids who don't want to go to college to these places. One thing to remember, though, whenever somebody says, and they do all the time, see, these kids shouldn't go to college, they should go be a plumber. It's really, really important to understand this. If you are smart, a plumber is a fairly high cognitive ability trade. If you are smart enough to be a plumber, you should go to college in today's environment and then go be a plumber. Get a college degree in business or something and then go be a plumber. The kids that we're talking about who shouldn't go to college are the kids who could probably be a plumber's assistant, the kids who, could be a toll booth collector. Okay. We don't really have a solution for that, but I guarantee you it's not college, and it's probably not vocational skill as it's currently envisioned. Right now, trade school is a high skilled thing. We need to really dramatically lower what we train people for. Okay. And then the other thing, as always, is I've never been a huge believer in education be the ticket out of poverty. I think jobs are the ticket out of poverty. And America needs to dramatically figure out its labor market to be able to make sure that kids can have jobs. As time goes on, we're getting more and more automated. There's going to be fewer and fewer low skilled jobs, and we have to make sure that we can keep those jobs and keep kids focused and able to do those low skilled jobs, which will be a lot.
Okay, so there's a question on the screen from Old Blue. So, what about the impact of, in quotes, garbage degrees that don't add to marketability in business? Can you comment on that?
Yeah, well, there's a lot of them, and that again goes back to colleges. Colleges need to find garbage degrees for kids who aren't particularly bright enough to go into a skilled area, and they're continually taking in more kids, right? You look at it from a college's point of view. You want growth. Okay. The worst thing that could happen to college is the type of stuff I'm talking about. The worst thing that could happen to colleges is more and more kids say, no, I'm not going to go to college. I'm just going to go to 2 years to junior colleges or go to the trades and do that, because that will reduce their income. So one of the things they want to do is make sure that anybody who comes in, that if they can keep them in any way possible to give them a degree, they will. And so, yeah, that's what's happening. I mean, at this point in time, if you're planning on going to Harvard and getting a degree in, I don't know, hotel industry, probably not the best way to spend your money. And people know that, but I mean, who, people make bad purchasing decisions all the time. That's what's happening. So it's not the impact that's the problem. It's the fact that colleges have kids who need degrees. Once you're in, it's certainly true that any degree is better than no degree. That's for sure. Okay, so colleges have created the garbage degrees to make sure that they have something for kids to do. And part of that is because colleges aren't in control of their professors. You know what I mean? Professors still hold a certain amount of standards. I'm like at California, in the California system did away with its remediation the against the will of the faculty. The faculty said this is a terrible idea. Colleges did it anyway, but they can't require professors to pass people. Professors have tenure. However, you might remember that there's fewer and fewer tenured professors in universities, and that's one of the things. So it's not the impact of garbage degrees. They're not doing anything to the market. They're just a way to help colleges get kids through with some sort of degree.
Okay. So in my country, when people go to the university, the courses that you're admitted to study is dependent on the grades you score in the entrance examination. So most people naturally want to study courses like medicine, pharmacy, law, engineering, and all that. So those are very competitive courses, and you have to score very high to get into those places. And if you don't score very high, then you have other options where you can take some other courses, maybe the social sciences and biological sciences and all that. And you get most people who study those other courses are those who could not get what they actually want. They wanted medicine, they wanted law, they wanted engineering, but they didn't meet up with it. So now they have to go study something else. And when they graduate, many of them don't even get to work in the field in which they studied. Probably they go learn a trade afterwards, or they just take up some other vocation or some other job, and they do that. They do that. So that's how it works in my country.
Right.
So people don't and people don't get to say, I want to go. It's very rare that you see people just decide to study English studies or some other course that might not be relevant in getting a job, um, that might not be relevant in helping them secure a very good paying job. It's usually they're forced to take those courses because they couldn't meet up with the grades of getting a better course or the one that they want. Now, there's another question I want to highlight. Maybe just comment on this. Mike San says, let the banks decide if the loan is worth it. Currently, the loans are backed by the government.
Yeah, but the loans are backed by the government because the they aren't dischargeable by bankruptcy. That's the real issue. So when you say let the banks decide if the loan is worth it, that would very much be about if you suddenly made school loans dischargeable by bankruptcy, um, then the banks would suddenly decide that a lot of college wasn't worth it. Okay, I would rather see something a little different. I definitely like to see that the banks. I would like to see the banks first have to make sure that the person's scholarly ability is up to it. But either way, again, if you took away the bankruptcy thing, if you took away the fact that these loans are for life, that they can't be cleared by anything, the banks would find their way of discovering if the loans are worth it. And that's not going to happen, but that's it. So that way or my way would do the same thing. In other words, either you force the banks to only loan money to people who have the ability to get through college, or you take away the discharge and say to the bank, this is your money you're playing with now. This is house money. And they would do the same thing. So Mike is basically saying a different version of me, which is basically take away the guarantee. Um, and remember, the loans are backed by the government because the government will just not allow you to declare bankruptcy. That's the real issue. One thing I wanted to say to what you were talking about, which is that, see, in America, law and medicine are graduate school degrees, and they're still, for the moment, and hopefully forever, there are requirements. There are requirements to get in. You have to in medicine and in law, you have to take a test, and there's competitive process to get in. So just because you want to be a doctor doesn't mean you're able to get into med school. And then if you get into med school, um, you have to after you're out of med school or law school, you'll have to pass a bar exam. There's a lot of people who go to law school and have a lot of loans and they can't manage to pass the bar exam, for example. So so we have that sorting mechanism happens here, but it doesn't happen in undergrad. Right now, as I said, we're not only not doing what you described, we've taken away even the SAT, which was at least a way to say, hey, even if it could be prepped for, it was saying, look, there's a way to get into here's the ability level of the person who's applying to the school. And as of just as last year, they're doing away with that. I don't know how long that will last. I really think colleges will be worried by what happens after that, because grades, as you know, are too highly variable.
Right. So we've been going for close to an hour now. I want to open up the conversation for other people to call in so that in the next 30 minutes we'll be done. So let
Okay.
me highlight one more question as Old Blue, Mike, anyone that wants to call in. The link is in the chat. I'll put it again. So there's a question on the screen again. Just comment on that. Melinda Sadler said, "Put trades back in high schools."
Yeah, there's a couple things. First off, trades were never really in high schools. There's never been some golden era when we had vocational ed in high school. We had shop and home ec, and they were kind of a waste of time. Good vocational school is very expensive. What killed trades, quote unquote, in high school happened at A Nation at Risk. A Nation at Risk, that article, that report I told you about, is basically what killed what trades we had, which was, again, shop and home ec mostly. And again, the idea that there was some time when America did a really good job of trade school in high school, it's nonsense. We never had such a time. But one thing that did happen in the 80s, 90s, and today is trade school came back, but it came back in a highly competitive way. There is trade schools in high schools. My own school, John F. Kennedy High School, is right next to ROP, which is a occupational program that's excellent. And kids go there to take auto mechanics. They go there to take computer stuff, robotics. They train to be firefighters. They train in the hospitality industry, and a lot of them go on to very good internships. So there's and that kind of situation exists all throughout the country. But vocational education is very, very expensive, and so it needs to be funded more than it is. But the idea that putting it in high schools, probably not a good idea. I think it would be better to open trade schools that were open to high school students as well as adult students starting at 11th grade, so that they could go there. And that, again, is something that's pretty common at most of the there are regional vocational centers now. We just need more funding for them than I think they already have. But again, trades weren't good in high school back in the day, and to bring them back now is very expensive, and we're better off keeping them in the programs where they are now, where high school students can't go to them. I'm not against trades at all. I think they're a good idea. I'm just saying that I think a lot of people have the idea that there was some period in time when we did a great job with vocational training in high school, and that's just not true. We never have.
All right, so there's another highlighted comment there on the screen from Afghan Old Blue. He says, "What are people who don't have the scholastic ability to graduate college going to do in an economy that doesn't contain jobs for them?" Can you comment on
That's
that?
the that's the problem, no matter what. Right? That's the problem, no matter what. Uh, you know, whether we send them to college and have them fake their way through for a couple years and not actually learn anything useful, or they don't go to college at all and just go to high school. I mean, that is always the problem, and it is a huge problem that we have tried to avoid thinking about by pretending that education is the answer. No, jobs are a better answer. The idea that the only thing stopping somebody from doing well in college is that they needed to be taught better is just not true. There are some people who are not bad people. They're not worth less or anything like that. And some of them have very good natures and very good skills. If we could find something, if they're good workers, they'll work hard. It's just not as many of those jobs available, and that's the problem that all countries are going to have to face. It's one of the reasons why, you need to look at your labor policy and how you're doing to make scarce jobs, to make the labor pool more valuable, and that generally doesn't mean increasing it. But I don't know what to do past that. But I mean, this is a question for everybody.
All right, so Michelle, thank you very much for this conversation. Okay, we have someone, Chloe. Chloe is coming into the conversation now. So, Chloe, welcome to the conversation. How are you
Hi,
doing
Hi.
today?
Chloe.
Hi.
You were here the last time too, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Hi.
Yeah, I definitely agree that parents need to have more input. I think I said this before, but like my parents, apparently I found out that Duke had sent me material in when I was in high school, and my parents just hid it from me. They're like, "No, we're not gonna," we're not even gonna have her entertain this option because we're not gonna pay for the loans.
Right.
And the college I went to, which was local, was just fine, and especially going into something technical, the prestige of the like a Harvard or a Notre Dame isn't that impactful if if you're going in for an electrical degree, right? um
Just one thing on that. One thing that really bothers me is that more and more there are certain jobs that cannot be done. That will never be available to somebody who didn't go to an elite school, and that really bothers me because you're right. The local college is doing as well, and on average, when you look at them, everybody's doing as well. But it used to be, 20, 30, 40 years ago that you could go to a local school and get to, say, the Supreme Court. You can't do that anymore, and
mhm.
that's been really that kind of change bothers me. But you're absolutely right. For the normal type of situation, you are correct that a local school is going to give you good opportunities. And I mean, I did very well out of and I had an English degree, speaking of which, an English degree from San Jose State. And it didn't ever stop me from getting a job that I wanted.
Yeah. um there was something else I
Oh, I'm
was
sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. I just
no, no,
wanted to
no,
pass
no,
that on.
no. That like I was is there was something else that I kind of wanted
Okay,
to
we were talking Duke.
Yeah, yeah. I said something about Duke, but I think it kind of also connects to like so how Old Blue said something about the garbage degree, and then these are like 19-year-old kids that see this prestigious school, and they just have to sign on the dotted line and have their parents co-sign for
Yeah,
like this huge loan, but it's because they're primarily signing for it. The parents have less of an input of maybe don't get that interpretive art degree, maybe
yes,
don't get that type of degree, because before it, like when Charles was saying, in Nigeria the parents pay for it. I think by default the parents can say, we're not going to pay for an art degree, or something like that. Or if you want to pursue this type of hobby, get a real job first, get a real
yep,
skill set first, and then you can do that in your spare time. And I
yeah,
think that's not necessarily communicated as much. Um, oh, so this might take it into a kind of a little bit of a different direction, but it kind of goes to what you were saying in a previous conversation of high ability, low will students, right?
oh yeah,
And in high school, and like they, people would just call them gifted, right? And they can easily kind of probably get into college. And one thing that I have seen, and there's like this YouTuber I think called Tiffany Ferg, who has this YouTube channel called Formerly Considered Gifted, and I've seen this in other places where people who have high ability and low will, they kind of breeze through high school, but when they get to college, suddenly now they're in an area where they for the first time they actually have to try, and they waffle, like, and it kind of seems like one thing that one would expect from high school is kind of develop a certain level of resiliency of,
hmm,
you have to actually learn to try on a certain level. And these people, some people just end up flunking out, like, oh, we thought you were going to be super rich and famous because you're super smart, but they go to
hmm,
college and then they hit a wall, and they just kind of falter.
Um, that happens less and less, if only because low will kids tend to have low grades, and it's very hard to get into a good college with low grades. It did certainly used to be the case. It's pretty close to what happened to me, although I graduated. Um, I was definitely one of those kids who didn't care about grades and then hit a wall in college. And hitting a wall is one of, like, when I talk to parents of really smart kids and they say, "What can I do for enrichments?" I said, "Give them something they suck at." I think we talked about that the last time we talked. Give them something they're really bad at, and make and get them to feel what it's like to fail. You know what I mean? Because that's something that every bright kid needs. But generally speaking, that's not who's failing out of school.
Hmm.
Who's failing out of school by and large are kids. One of two things: either profound unreadiness, so they're just like really lost in school, they can't afford to pay, and they don't see any value in it. And then the other group is kids who can't afford it and who quit. They need to support their family. Those are the two big groups that are dropping out, as a rule. Um, so as a rule, the high ability kids, if you're a high ability kid these days, you'll be able to make it through college because college isn't that hard anymore, fundamentally. Now,
Yeah.
what is also true is that those high ability kids are less likely to get high ability degrees. For example, I got an English degree because I didn't like math till I was about 40, and even now I'm not crazy about it. So, there was I didn't go into linguistics or something like that, for example. But I really think the main thing is that we're just getting a lot of kids in school who can't do the work. And as I said, the problem is there's going to be increased pressure now to reduce. Um, there's going to be increased pressure now to reduce the standards for a college degree even more than they already have been, and that's quite terrifying. And that's going to be happening, and that is going to be happening, like it's going to be happening at Harvard as much as it is San Jose State, as much as it is Podunk U in Iroquois Valley, New York, or something like that. It's going to be all the way through.
Okay,
Uh,
so before Old Blue comments, there's a question on this, sort of a
mhm.
comment on the screen that I'd like you to comment on, by Ben. Ben, it said, "I was homeschooled from K to eighth grade. What are your thoughts on homeschooling outcomes? Do you have data on the outcomes of homeschoolers in higher ed?"
I don't have it, but I know it's really good, and that's like I am like I mean I'm glad you were homeschooled. Generally speaking, whenever people talk to me about homeschool, my eyes just kind of glaze over, like, yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, look, if you have a mom who's is able to stay at home and doesn't mind staying at home, and you've got the money to have the mom stay at home and educate your kids, great. Okay, that describes what, 3% of the population? Well, yeah, it's a highly select skill set, and they're highly bright kids. There's not a lot of evidence that homeschoolers go on to change the world in any way. In other words, the education isn't but they're very highly educated and the stats are good, but it's selection bias. I mean, would I say to a parent who does not have a high school degree and only reads at a fourth grade level to homeschool their child? I'm not, I don't want to sit here and sound like I'm value judging, but I'm not entirely sure that's the best thing to do. So, when we talk about homeschooling, we're saying, oh, great, so it's an educated adult at home or a not educated adult at home. I mean, I think that's a huge issue that nobody ever talks about. You've got a highly educated, and notice you said you were homeschooled from K through 8. It's much harder. There's a lot less homeschooling in high school. One, the mom, who's usually the homeschooling person doing it, the mom is not able to do high school subjects. The kid is less willing to play along in high school. Kid's more likely to want peers. And keep in mind, there's all sorts of homeschooling clubs to do away with to address that. But I'm just saying, again, it's not that I'm against homeschool at all. I'm really not. I'm just like, it's not a solution to anything we're talking about, But they do very well in college, from what I've heard. And again, there's a lot of research on that.
All right, Old Blue, welcome to the conversation.
Hi, thanks. Great conversation. I've really appreciated hearing it. But you
Thanks.
said something about high school earlier not having the value that it once had, but to me, it's like a very clear marker between people who are at least moderately successful and those who truly, truly struggle. So I've got 4 children, and to me, and what I've said to them is, graduating high school is non-negotiable. It is simply the price of admission. And I think that, we have some populations with extremely low high school graduation rates, and we see very poor socioeconomic outcomes, multi-generational poverty. Bad things come from not graduating from high school. And it causes a lot of social complications, and quite frankly, our ability to absorb unskilled, uneducated people who stream into the country, who are foreign nationals, who then compete with the non-high school graduates, which is not fair to the non-high school graduate Americans.
Yep.
Because they're going to get out competed on a couple of levels. But one certainly would be getting priced out of the market. What they would consider to be an acceptable wage then becomes something that can easily be undercut. So, I was a little confused by saying that, basically the value of a high school education has been depleted.
Well, it has, but it doesn't mean. But everything you said, I agree with. Let me give you an example. I got 2 kids that are, they're juniors, and they have a 1.2 GPA. They don't have enough credits to graduate, neither one of them, right? And so here's what's going to happen everywhere. It's been happening all along throughout their high school career. They're going to get called in with their parents and the counselors and everything else. It's like, look, how do we get you back on track? Do you want to go to the alternative school? And there it's a very fuzzy system, but you can go there for 2 years and work hard and get the degrees to graduate. You can stay here. We can put you in summer school. You can take, summer school this year and next year. And if you work hard and keep it together, and we do this, and you can pass. And one kid says yes, and one kid says no. And one kid says, yeah, I'll go to alternative high school, and he does nothing and drops out. And the other kid says, yeah, I'm gonna give it a shot. And then gets pulled through. I mean, pulled through, like he screws around every day in class, and the teacher said, what, remember? Oh, that's right. Yeah. Okay. I'll show up today and I'll do. I mean, we're talking not worked hard, did everything right. We're talking he was just pulled through every step of the way. But every step of the way, when somebody said, hey, this is the last chance, do it, he did it. No matter how much he screwed around in the meantime, he did it. And by golly, that kid gets through and the other one doesn't. I guarantee you that the kid who got through and got the high school diploma is going to have better stats than the kid who dropped out. That's still true. That the act of, and it's not an intellectual betterness. You know what I mean? It's not that one's necessarily smarter than the other.
Mm-hmm.
That quality, whatever it is that make these 2 kids who both, forgive me, you would call losers, right? One of them every step, and I deal with the second kid. I mean, the first kid, the kid that makes it through a lot of my classes at, and I'm reminding myself of that every day. I had a kid just the other day go, hey, I've been working hard for a whole week now. And it's like, and he was right. He's been working hard for a whole week, and that's something. And so you're absolutely right. When I say a high school diploma didn't mean anything, I mean academically. If you look at the difference between a kid who graduates with a 4.0 GPA from certain schools, as opposed to a kid who graduates from a 2.0 GPA from certain schools, is other kids who don't graduate at all. You could find group kids in every category who have identical academic scores. And that's what I was talking about, that it's not a standard academically.
Okay, thank you for that.
I just wanted to say one other thing, which I totally agree with you. When I said that we need a better labor market, I honestly believe when you talk about how to help unskilled people get jobs, the answer is a tighter labor market. And that means a tighter immigration policy. And that's a highly contentious thing to say in America right now. I get it, but that is truly what I see as a big issue.
Yeah, I think we need to be able to accept, or basically discuss reality unemotionally. In other words, not deny real impacts for real people and ignore them as part of the conversation, as if either they didn't exist or as if it was somehow immoral to bring that up. because
Not only that, in addition to those two, which I agree, there's a third one was, well, no, they're being let down by their schools. I'm like, oh, please, no. The bell curve, forgive me, exists. You've got people at the lower end, and they're entitled to their country's support. And part of that support should be not allowing a whole bunch of labor to come in to compete with them. So no, I completely agree with you.
Thanks. I really appreciate you taking that question. I do have another question that I actually put in the YouTube chat, but it was early on in the conversation that you were having with Charles. I don't know if there's any statistics on this, but there are fewer young men than young women entering college.
Right.
Those are traditional students. Are you aware of any statistics on? Because a lot of men, in my experience, wind up as non-traditional students. I served 31 years in the military. Most of the senior enlisted ranks, generally a sergeant major in the Army is going to have a minimum of an associate's degree, but generally they have bachelor's degrees that they've earned along the way. So do you see any balancing in that effect? Because I see fewer women as non-traditional students. I mean, notwithstanding the Hallmark movies where grandma goes back to college.
There's two things on there. One, I've always been. First off, if you sort by if you control for socioeconomic status, the vast majority of the gap comes from poor and lower educational kids. I mean, lower income kids. You look at rich kids, there's not it's not like it's, when people read this article and they're like, this lawyer in San Fernando Valley going, oh my God, I have to worry about my teenage boy. No, you really don't. You don't really need to worry. Your kid's going to go to college. The real issue is that there are a lot of, and I mentioned this, there are a lot of paths through to get good incomes that are not through college for men more than for women. And so there's recently the Wall Street Journal and some other did a big article on this. They're like, this is problem for our assortative mating, because as time goes on, there'll be women with college degrees and there won't be any men with college degrees. I'm like, no, if you're a secretary with a bachelor's in a BA in business, trust me, you're happy married to a plumber. You know what I mean? It's like they're kind of envisioning all these highly skilled women, but the fact is we've just been talking about, there's a lot of crap college degrees out there, and the numbers being what they are, more women than men are getting the crap college degrees. More men go into the math, men go into most of the sciences except biology. So you know what I mean? It doesn't make sense that there are more. That all these women are getting fabulous degrees. So I'm far less worried about that generally. And yes, I do think at the other end, the two major groups you have going back to college are men often in the military and coming back for college. And then the other one is women, single moms who were, got their degree when they were, got pregnant at 18 and then, made something of themselves and now want to go back to school and get college. Those are probably the two big traditional groups. But there are a lot of people going back to college who are also very low skilled. It's very common.
Yeah, two things. First, I mean, you've got the military, but in the military, actually, especially now, somebody joins and serves for say 3 years.
My nephew is, and I have really good. Like some of my star students joined the military because they got a full ride scholarship, and my nephew enlisted at 18 and is getting paid to go to college. So I do realize that a lot of them are going to college as well.
Yeah, I mean, really with a 3-year enlistment, based under the current law and the post 9/11 GI Bill, you can earn a full 4 years of college plus a stipend. Essentially, it's a housing allowance. But there are, you mentioned several fields that men can go into that provide living wages. Decent living wages, middle class wages, like police, fire. There's probably construction, heavy equipment operation.
The trades, all the trades, and then police, fire, and military,
But when you reach when it comes to promotions, you do hit a glass ceiling where you can't progress anymore. And this is why I mentioned, the sergeants major in the Army tend to have bachelor's degrees, and the reason is because they become non-competitive. It's not a requirement,
Yeah.
but they become non-competitive if they don't have that degree. Their chances of making E9 are greatly diminished.
Well, this is just like
So
what I was saying earlier, about the, there's people, who get a really good job, and I know people got really good jobs right out of high school, and they stayed in that career for 20, 30, 40 years. And when they lose that job, something goes wrong, the company goes under, they, whatever. They're then at that point, if you're in your mid 40s and you don't have a college degree, it doesn't really matter what your experience is. I mean, there are some exceptions to that rule, but it's very common for that. And that's why I always tell people, if I know, they're like, oh, I don't have a college degree, but I have a great job. I'm like, get a freaking degree. I don't care what it's in. Get something on the resume so that you have it. It's worth it. And that's
yeah,
one of the other things, is that when people talk about college, it's like the opportunity cost of going to college at 18 is less than at any other point in your career for most jobs. I mean,
completely
again, the
agreed.
military being an exception.
But I think that we see the indications in the market, in the education market, that this is a real thing because of the explosion of non-traditional paths now online, which, granted, a person needs to be very, very selective, because some degrees are not viewed, some online degrees are not viewed favorably, whereas you
Yeah.
also have established colleges and universities that now have non-traditional programs. I live in the Cincinnati area. We have a university, or a college here, Thomas More College, that I don't know if the word specialized would really apply accurately to them, but they offer a bunch of programs for working adults. So I guess that's my point, is you're starting to see that opportunity cost not be as great, because traditionally you would basically have to either change jobs so that you were working at night, because the classes were only offered during the day. Now
Right.
you've got, Thomas More, they have evening classes. They offer a lot of master's degree programs for people that, again, there are in a lot of companies, there's that glass wall that you run into if you have a bachelor's degree but not a master's.
Yeah.
So a lot of
Same thing.
MBA programs out there. So I
Yeah.
think that that's an indication that going back later is a real thing. I don't know whether we're accounting for that in our statistics.
That's actually a very good point. I know somebody who got unemployed. She was the type of person I was talking about, who didn't have a college degree, had a great career all her life, and then was unemployed. And I said, get a college degree. And she goes, it's too late. I'm like, honestly, you're going to be working for another 13 years, probably not. And, she didn't. And I don't know. One of the things is, for a long time, I'm talking like going back to the early 2000s, an online degree, the dropout rate was huge, you know what I mean? Because of the self-education. But somewhere around 5 or 6 years ago, like, I know people who got their ed credential online, you know what I mean? It's really becoming more and more common. I don't know what the success rate is, by which I mean, are they graduating 90% of their students or 30% of their students? Are they collecting a lot of money? Because there was a whole industry, a whole big scandal about for-profit colleges a while back, and a lot of that is online. So I don't know, and that is, I've been thinking about that lately, because I see commercials. University of New Hampshire, we have good things. I think it's Case University, and now you're talking about the Thomas More one. So I do think some of them you'll see, look, they're like, look, we do 6 degrees. That's it. One of these 6. And those, I think, might be good. And you're right. I don't know how much of it is people going back, getting degrees for the first time. The other thing I don't know is how much of that really helps you. Like, I got to say, getting a nursing degree has got to help you. You know what I'm saying? So I think that would be a really interesting field to study, to see what's going on there. Maybe somebody's done it, but I haven't read any research in it. That's a really good point. I'm going to go look some stuff up on that.
Yeah, I think that, I think the indications are, that there's, organizations go where the money is. And there's obviously money to be made in that. These programs are successful and obviously growing, because they've got enough money to spend on advertising.
On TV, nonetheless, yeah.
And it would be interesting to see what the ratio of male to female going into that would be. Lastly,
Oh,
the
hang on.
requirement.
One thing, wait, just want to say one thing. Just occurred to me that tying in what you said with, I'm going to go back and read that Wall Street Journal article, because it wouldn't surprise me at all if there were a bunch of guys in their 20s that for no other reason, maybe they have a kid, maybe they've been working, they're like, holy crap, it really is better, that don't go back to school in an online degree like that, and so that it can still work. I mean, that it's just putting that together. I think you're right. That's a really, and the more I think about that, that's really an interesting thing. How big is that market, and how many people are getting degrees that way?
Yeah. Finally, the necessity of a bachelor's degree. We're starting to see some companies saying we're not focused on that. We're looking more at these other skills. And I think the last administration actually implemented an executive order that changed the educational requirements for some federal positions. But
Yeah.
What I find in a lot of ways, for instance, any company's training manuals, they look a lot like Army manuals. They look a lot like military manuals. And as a matter of fact, I think that they basically crib off of the military because those are effective strategies. But another strategy that I think we've seen, the government, there are so many jobs in the government that require a bachelor's degree, and very often it's non-specific.
Yeah.
Just simply must have a bachelor's degree.
Yeah.
And so I think that business sometimes emulates and says, well, for this position and higher, for instance, you could work for that company for 15 years, have a stellar reputation, know your job inside and out, and you will never make that management leap because you do not have the degree. And I think we're starting to see a little bit of a cultural shift there. But the U.S. government, for instance, it was back in the 80s, I want to say, that there was a requirement to have a bachelor's degree. I mean, not a bachelor's degree, a high school diploma, in order to join. And now there was a transition period where they basically offered GED programs essentially. So you could enlist, but if you didn't attain your GED within a specified period, and I don't know how long that was, it was a period of months, not years, then you were discharged. These days, you have to have a high school diploma or a GED. There is no waiver available for that, and no other programs.
Well, the one thing that I will say about all of this is that if you talk about a world in which college degrees aren't necessary, as they are right now, just the piece of paper to prove you have some minimal level of competence. When you talk about the employers that say, "Oh, we just need experience," at some point in time, there's something called a test going on. There has to be. You know what I'm saying? And there is. Let me tell you, if you've looked at like Microsoft and all of Microsoft certifications and Cisco certifications and all them, do you know what they spend a fortune on? Making sure their tests are secure, because the cheating market is huge. And so at the end of the day, any talks about, well, what, instead of getting college, get certified, there's going to be a huge amount of cheating. And so unless the company is just doing the training themselves, which, I mean, the tests themselves. And again, there's laws, there's court cases against companies doing anything approaching an IQ test. So all I'm saying is that the college benchmark exists for a reason. And one of the things I'd rather do than go too far down that right, as I said before, is I'd really want to see high school diplomas tiered, and say, basic, nothing guaranteed. No, this person, we guarantee this person has an 8th grade ability, which is better than a lot, then 10th grade, then ready for college or something like that. Because no matter what we go, the reason that we use these signaling markers is because they're difficult to game. They've been traditionally difficult to game. And so if we make them too easy to game and they become meaningless and something else comes up, that one's going to have problems too. And the most common thing I can think happening with any kind of employer saying, well, we'll use Microsoft certification. Is go look up the words Microsoft and cheating. It was big. There was huge problems with it until Microsoft cracked it. There hasn't been too many cases of it since I think 2015 or so. But I'm just saying those problems exist. Any kind of problem exists when you have a huge population. And that's one of the reasons why I feel at the end of the day, companies should be taking on some of the training themselves. They always say they spend a lot of money trying to find qualified people. I'm like, well, bring in a bunch, train them. Can't be that, it might be more expensive, but at least you'll have somebody at the end of it.
Yeah, well, something that interferes with that is that, and this is something that began, I would say, in the 90s or the 80s, late 80s, mid to late 80s, and increased through the 90s, and now it's just become kind of a paradigm, is essentially either contracting or staff augmentation type personnel services that allow companies to bring in people, skilled people for peak workload needs. If somebody's doing a massive IT project, they don't need to employ those people permanently. And those companies they're not going to do training programs.
Sure, but then when you're right, I agree. And then they're going to whine about how hard it is to find good people. I get it. I saw that one comment that Mike Sexton said the tiered degrees would be a good idea, but I agree it's politically very, very difficult. But without, again, then your next sentence, there needs to be some sorting mechanism. The problem is that America is very worried about what its sorting mechanisms will reveal. That's the problem.
What was that last part?
That America, the country, and this is probably true of most Western countries, but the problem is Mike Sexton said in the comments, there needs to be some sort of sorting mechanism. I'm like, yeah, but the problem is nobody wants to see what the sorting mechanism will say. That's why we're where we're at now, is because as much as we tried to not sort, as much as we tried to equalize opportunities for the past 30 to 50 years, we're still where we're at today, and there's a lot of anger about it. And so we're even going to less sorting right now than we've done before. And I agree there needs to be a sorting mechanism. I want to make it pretty broad. And as I said, I also want to reduce the labor pool. I think that's important. But the problem is that sorting will reveal stuff that makes everybody uncomfortable and leads to lawsuits. And I don't know what to do about that. And by the way, going back to what you were saying, Old Blue, is that is why when people talk about, well, we're not going to use college degrees, we're going to use, tech fields will use training and this and that, that's only going to survive to the first lawsuit. And lawsuits are a big problem in terms of hiring. And that's one of the reasons that colleges, the college degree was such a safe guideline in the first place, because you could shepherd people through to a college degree.
Chloe, go ahead.
Yeah, Chloe.
Hey, so in regards to the tech stuff, so there's I have a computer engineering degree, and currently I do software professionally, but there was a period of time where I was really kind of fascinated by this big boom of software boot camps. So they had a bunch of, there was like Iron Yard and all of these boot camps in which, they had different types of systems, and where you would, pay like $30,000 and you would quit your job and you would study software, for like 3 months straight, right? Or they have these different systems in which it was part-time, and so it would take a little bit longer so you can work at the same time. And there was a huge boom of these in which people kind of said, you don't need a college degree, you just need this certification of this program. And even those were kind of really ripe with kind of fraud, because when they had the statistics of, X amount of, like 80% of all of our graduates get a job, how they scam that statistic to make their certification seem more valuable is that they just hire the grads that couldn't get a job.
They hired the grad. I remember that. Yeah.
So they technically,
and that was also leaving out the attrition rate, which was substantial. The people who couldn't cut it. Yeah.
Exactly. And I remember, I got this really sinking feeling of you're giving people a false sense of how what makes a college degree valuable, or what makes this
Yeah.
training valuable. And I could tell that they were obviously going to flood the system with a bunch of, software engineers or software developers that had a limited set of skills, really, because how much can you really learn and how much experience can you
Yeah.
really have in around 3 months or
Yeah.
even 8 months, right? And then they say, oh, we're going to get jobs that gonna, we're going to make $170,000 a year. But, that's before this flood of all of these boot camp grads.
Yeah.
And so the
Yeah.
the price is obviously going to decrease. And then there's also the fact of, there is, at least in Silicon Valley, in we talked earlier, like is mentioned earlier, about immigration.
Yeah.
Immigration in terms of Silicon Valley is a huge problem.
Yeah.
The basically is almost like, they're indentured servants, with holding their visa paperwork over their heads. So we're looking at the high salaries of Americans who get into the tech industry, but we don't know about
Yeah.
how low the salaries of the immigrants are.
It's funny. I was for years before I became into teaching, I was a consultant, and I always charged somewhere between 90 and 100, $110 an hour was my rate for the whole decade plus that I did this. And then there was a crash. The dot-com crash of 2001 was by far the most economically difficult one for me. I mean, if you go through all the crashes, I've gone through most of them without much trouble. I came through the 2008 one. It's hard to find a teaching job, but the 2001 one was hit .com really hard. And I was in Silicon Valley there at the time. And I decided to go to grad school. And while I was in grad school, I had a job and the rate was $50 an hour. I was like, oh my God. It's like, well, I'll take it because, um, I just need something to work while I'm in school. And there was suddenly I started looking at all the jobs and I realized that there had been just a flood of labor to the market and it drove down the rates by half. And it was really funny because I'm like, well, I don't like this work enough to do it for 50 an hour. And that was when I said I was tutoring and I was basically charging 50 an hour for tutoring. And I'm like, well, this is more fun. But my point is, yeah, I very much at an earlier age saw the flood of labor. It's a real problem in computer industry. And when they talk about how nobody's majoring in computer science anymore, I'm like, yeah, well, look at how you're, look at every single head of every major company and what they say about how we need more immigrants and how why do they want them? They want to drive. These are the guys that got together and agreed to not charge too much money. I mean, they kind of agreed to conspire on salaries, and there's all sorts of stuff like that going on. And then they say, well, why don't Americans degree in the sciences? Well, it's like it's not financially worth it. So I agree with what you're saying, and you're right. And by the way, I'm always like, you've never thought of programming before, you've never done it before. You're going to quit your job, go take a 3-month course, and become a good programmer. In my experience, the number of born programmers found that way is maybe one out of every 850 gazillion. I mean, and that's just a randomly made up number. But the fact is, most people who like to code find it. I mean, I'm a decent coder and I figured out coding before I went, you know what I mean? And it's like, and I'm not somebody who's like lives and dies by it. I'm just kind of a general decent talent at it. And I still found it fairly early before it came. So the idea that there's all these people out there who could be programmers, it's just that they just never thought of it before. Coding's a lot of skill and native ability. It's not necessarily something you can kind of push into somebody's head. So I've
Yeah.
always been skeptical of that.
Yeah, and one thing I've noticed is the, non-traditional software, education industry. A lot of so I even went into like a Discord of one of these big YouTubers that was pushing all this non-traditional education of like Udemy courses and all that kind of stuff.
Mhm.
And behind the scenes, like, that's her story of like, I was a non-traditional person. I taught myself how to code through these courses. And of course there's an affiliate
Mhm.
link. And behind the scenes, she was only one step above what video she put out. She actually didn't know any of this stuff.
Yeah,
And I
yeah,
remember in the Discord of like, she put out a video about virtual machines. And then in the Discord, she's like, how do I, not have the operating system load every single time I boot up the virtual machine? I'm like, you don't know this, and you're actually
yeah.
trying to educate people. But
But
she
see,
was
this is the thing. You went non-traditional programming. Here's what it is. Here's the resume. It says, I've applied 4 fixes to 5 open source programs. Here's my work in GitHub. That's non-traditional programming. That's somebody who did it on their own, learned it by their own, and has value because open source software has accepted his fixes. That's how you do it in computers. So whenever somebody says boot camp, I'm always like,
yeah, and of course, like a lot of these boot camps have just collapsed. They've just gone
yeah,
under because the fact that it doesn't work, it eventually catches up to them.
yeah, yeah,
And so yeah, that's my experience, and it's very interesting to see how it's in that field that they really are kind of going a little bit overboard as
yeah,
to denigrating at least a STEM degree, because in terms of these boot camps, like I said, there really isn't enough time to actually be able to develop some experience, because
yeah,
at least in a STEM field in college, you can join a project, you can join like a school competition, and so you can actually put down the projects that you've been participating in as if they are jobs, so that you
yeah.
actually looks like you have a job on your resume. And for people who go to school and don't utilize the network of opportunities when they go to a school, and they just go straight get a straight degree, they just got a like electrical engineering degree, they
Mhm.
didn't do anything else. I think that for that person, probably going to school wasn't worth it for them, because they did not utilize the networked opportunities that the school actually does
Well,
provide.
you'd be surprised. A lot of them end up as marketing people. I remember when I was in programming, all the guys running the companies had electrical engineering degrees, but they were the marketing folks. It cracked me up. But just to tie what we're saying in together with the whole thing, again, colleges have traditionally provided some really important signaling. And for the reasons that you've just described. And so when Old Blue and some of the commenters say, well, we can go, there's employers that are opting out of that. Not as many as you think, for very few fields. And as we've just been talking about, it's not as reliable as you think. And that's why, really, at the end of the day, you really do need some sort of program that is relatively neutral to denote ability. And what's happening is the politics are corrupting our two major ones, which is high school and college, from accurately denoting that. Can I just say one thing? I saw the comment Melinda did. If you want to put it back on the screen, bring back holding kids back grades and just not passing them along. I don't, people who say that, it's like, look, do you want 8-year-olds in kindergarten? Do you want 21-year-olds in high school? Because the fact is that if you hold back kids and just not pass them along, then you're going to have to hold to that, and it's not going to work, because the ability, what you're deciding is that there's a given level of ability that, and I don't mean to be sarcastic about it. I know the people who say this mean well, but it's like, you don't understand what below average means. Okay. And below average should not be a punishment. And if you can't envision, if you don't really believe that it could end up being kids who never get passed along, right, and are basically designating themselves a failure in 3rd grade, which is what will happen. There's a lot of research that says that, kid who's low ability when they're kindergartners are also low ability in high school. And so to say let's not pass them, I don't think that works. I think what we need to do is teach them. I'd like to keep kids in school until they're seniors. I just like to be able to teach them something that's useful to them, rather than say everybody's going to college and say, well, I can only teach them trig. I can't teach them how to make a maze. I can't teach them how to make a catapult. I can't teach them how to write a report on how they made a maze or a catapult, or something like that, so that they feel some sense of competence in their abilities. Just as example, because I'm an engineering teacher, I can't teach them how to cook a meal. Can't teach them how to be a short order cook. you know. And these things come with other abilities that are school related, reading, writing, and arithmetic, as they're always known. But I just think to say that we should hold a standard and fail everybody who doesn't have it, I don't think everybody understands what that would do to our system if we really did it.
There is, like Job Corps as well.
Yeah.
I think that people don't actually acknowledge that that is something that is good for those types of students you were just talking about.
Yeah. Yeah, that's right. There's other things. Um, Uncle Iro says in the comments, he said, but doesn't isn't below average something that could incentivize parents to become more engaged with their children's educational outcomes? Well, again, you're assuming that the parents being engaged will make the kid above average. No guarantees. That's what I'm saying. It's like you have to accept that below average exists. And what do you do with below average kids? And I don't believe giving up on them is a good idea. I would like more ability to educate them at their level rather than pretending that they're taking trig when they really don't even barely understand algebra. That would be nice. But I don't think the idea to say, well, just fail them and make them take the same thing over and over and over again is a good idea either. Again, it comes down to,
Okay.
sorry.
Okay, so I think this would be a very good place for us to bring the conversation to a close. So we're going
Sounds
for
good.
an hour 45 minutes. So I didn't want it to cross an hour 30 minutes, but it's good. So Michelle, I'll just let you finish your thoughts. Then Old Blue can say a few things. Chloe, then Michelle. Oh, we're done for today.
Oh, I'm
So
done. I,
finish your
I, as
thoughts.
always, I want to just say, as always, the commenters here, both the ones that just type in, and then Old Blue and Chloe, great commenters. I really, you guys, you have a really good group here. It's really, I mean, like I've gotten some ideas from both Chloe and Old Blue. I'm going to go look up.
Wow, thank you. So Old Blue.
Thank you. No, I've enjoyed the conversation. I think that there are a number of things here that require some attention. And one is the issue of the ease, the ready availability of money. Huge, and it has devalued the end product in a lot of ways. But these are issues that tie into a complex system of, I don't know, failures is a strong word, but of complications that have impacted our entire society. And so I really appreciate the conversation. You've been absolutely a great resource. So thank you for
Oh, thank
taking your
you.
time.
Thanks. Oh, it's fun. I love these.
Yeah, Chloe.
Yeah, I've really enjoyed these conversations, and yeah, I think taking out certain financial incentives to, basically for have universities increase their consumer base. We need actually universities to see students as students and not customers, and
Consumers.
not
Yeah.
have
Oh, yeah.
degrees as products.
Yes.
They are degrees that are meant to intellectually enrich students, not to just be the carrot that has them paying more and more money. And again, having a diversity of kind of options for students of different abilities, so they can at least, there is a place for them to go to at least find their niche in the market.
Yep.
Yeah.
No, I agree. Great comments again.
All right. Thank you very much, Chloe. Thank you, um, Old Blue, for joining this stream and for adding your voice to the conversation. I really, really appreciate you guys. And Michelle, as always, thank you very much for your insights. Um, I believe that you have become a part of the critical African thinkers community, and
Oh,
we
thank
feel
you.
comfortable to, yeah, we feel comfortable to call on you at any time that we need
Well,
your
thank
voice
you.
in these conversations. So thank you
Well,
very
I've
much. We
as I
really
said,
enjoy.
I'm really impressed with the commenters here. I just, as I said, it's really good. You don't get the usual,
Yeah,
you
there's
know what I
some
mean?
really,
You don't
really
get
smart
the, yeah,
people here.
yeah, yeah. It's
Really, really
excellent.
smart people here, and And I'm happy that I'm getting to meet these people because it's just broadening my horizon. It's just, it's good. This is what I live for. I mean, this is
Yeah.
literally what I live for. This is what makes me happy. I mean, I don't watch sports or do some other stuff. This is it for me. And
Talk
it's
policy,
good. It's
baby.
so good
That's
to be,
it.
yeah, it's so good to be talking to very smart people. So Michelle, thank you very much for coming. We really appreciate your presence, and I love your energy. I love your energy, the energy that you
Oh,
bring to
thank
the
you so
conversation.
much.
It's
Thank
awesome.
you.
It's awesome. So we'll catch you in another live stream. So that's it for now, guys. Like, share, and subscribe. And until next time, remain awesome,
Bye bye,
guys.
guys.
So
Thank
bye,
you.
bye.
Bye.